The moment you react to a toxic person, you hand them the keys to your nervous system. In behavioral profiling, we know that manipulators, narcissists, and high conflict personalities do not attack you to win an argument. They attack you to extract a reaction. Your anger, your panicked explanations, your tears, and your desperate attempts to defend your character are the exact psychological currency they feed on. When you get emotional, you give them data. You show them your pressure points, your insecurities, and the exact sequence of buttons required to break your posture. Most people fall into the trap of fighting back. They scream, they send long text messages, and they exhaust their mental bandwidth trying to force a toxic individual to see their point of view. They think winning the argument is the victory. It isn't. Winning the argument keeps you locked in their dynamic. If you leave right now, you will keep running in the same emotional hamster wheel, letting low-status operators drain your energy and dictate your mood. Stay right here. Over the next few minutes, we will break down the exact behavioral mechanics of radical indifference. You will learn how to weaponize your calm, starve toxic individuals of emotional feedback, and discover why your unshakable peace is the most devastating punishment you can ever inflict on someone who wanted your destruction. The power of emotional starvation. In situational authority and nonverbal profiling, we measure power by one primary metric: who controls the emotional baseline of the room. When a high-conflict individual targets you, their operational goal is simple: disrupt your baseline, trigger a spike in your stress hormones, and force you into a reactive posture. They want you angry, confused, and defensive because a reactive person is easy to profile, easy to predict, and easy to manipulate. The ultimate counter-strategy is not aggressive retaliation. It is absolute, unyielding peace. When you meet their calculated provocation with unbothered stillness, you strip them of their leverage and turn their own psychological weapons directly back onto them. To understand why your peace inflicts psychological damage on an aggressor, you must look at how their mind operates under fire. A manipulator's internal structure is inherently fragile. To maintain their fragile ego, they require constant external validation and conflict. They cast you in a specific script: the victim who loses composure and begs for fairness. When you refuse to play that role, when your heart rate remains steady, your posture stays grounded, and your voice remains slow and calm, you shatter their expected script. The feedback loop they relied on instantly snaps. They are left standing in an echo chamber of their own toxicity with zero data to feed on. The moment you begin over-explaining yourself or frantically defending your integrity, you have already surrendered your frame. Low-value operators use false accusations and manufactured drama specifically to lure you into justifying your actions. When you offer long, defensive explanations, your nervous system signals to the room that you are subordinate, seeking approval, and deeply affected by their opinion. High-authority operators do not negotiate their reality with toxic people. They set boundaries with surgical precision, deliver short, neutral statements, and allow silence to do the heavy lifting. Your refusal to justify your existence is a direct declaration of absolute sovereignty. There is a massive operational difference between active hatred and pure, cold indifference. If you claim to be unbothered, but your vocal pitch rises, your hands fidget, your blink rate spikes, or you deliver rapid-fire retorts, your physiology betrays your lie. True tactical peace requires training your autonomic nervous system to stay quiet under fire. When confronted, drop your shoulders, slow your breathing, hold an unhurried vocal cadence, and allow a slight pause before answering any question. By mastering your micro-behaviors, you send an undeniable signal down your own vagus nerve and directly to the aggressor that your baseline is completely impenetrable. The highest level of situational dominance is reached when you stop viewing their behavior through a personal lens. Realize that their attacks are never about your actual flaws. They are desperate projections of their own internal disorder. When you maintain your internal peace, you refuse to absorb their emotional trash. You remain focused on your own high-level objectives, your own discipline, and your own trajectory. While they burn themselves out attempting to stir up friction, you continue executing with cold, quiet efficiency. Your thriving, quiet success and absolute immunity to their presence become the ultimate, undeniable proof of your victory. Strategic calm as a psychological weapon represents a profound, fundamental evolution in how an operator navigates high-conflict dynamics and adversarial human profiling. Far too many people labor under the misapprehension that strength in a confrontation requires immediate aggressive retaliation, elevated vocal volume, or a sharp verbal defense. In behavioral mechanics and tactical nonverbal profiling, an emotional outburst is recognized for what it truly is: a transparent, low-status signal of distress. When an aggressor, a high-conflict personality, or a manipulator launches a calculated attack against your character or boundaries, their primary objective is never the logical content of the argument. Their true goal is to extract a predictable physiological reaction from you. They want to observe your heart rate spike, your vocal cadence accelerate, your facial microexpressions shift toward fear or anger, and your physical frame collapse into a defensive posture. By forcing your central nervous system into a state of emotional turmoil, they successfully breach your perimeter, strip you of your analytical clarity, and establish absolute control over the dynamic. Deploying strategic calm completely neutralizes this predatory dynamic by depriving the adversary of the precise neurological feedback they require to maintain their offense. A manipulator's entire tactical framework relies on an action-reaction feedback loop. They throw a verbal dart, expect your ego to flare up defensively, and then use your angry or frantic response as leverage to escalate the conflict or paint you as the unhinged party. When you meet an aggressive provocation with unyielding, absolute calm, you unilaterally sever that feedback loop. By holding your physical frame perfectly still, maintaining a relaxed vocal cadence, regulating your respiration, and staring through the provocation with cold, unbothered stillness, you present an impenetrable wall. The aggressor's incoming attack finds no traction, no emotional resistance to push against, and no data to analyze. Your silence and indifference force their toxic projection to bounce off your frame and ricochet straight back onto them, exposing their underlying desperation and leaving them completely disoriented in the space they attempted to conquer. Furthermore, strategic calm safeguards your highest operational asset, your prefrontal cortex. The moment you allow an external insult or boundary breach to trigger anger or panic, your brain floods your system with cortisol and adrenaline, effectively hijacking your higher-level executive functioning. You drop into a primitive fight or flight state, where your ability to read subtle behavioral cues, calculate long-term risks, and execute strategic countermaneuvers is utterly compromised. Radical inner peace serves as an impenetrable psychological armor that keeps your autonomic nervous system quiet under intense pressure. By remaining cool, detached, and emotionally uninvested, you retain 100% of your cognitive bandwidth. You are able to view the aggressor not as a threat to your self-esteem, but as an insecure subject exhibiting predictable behavioral glitches. You read their micro-behaviors with surgical clarity, spot the exact leverage points in the interaction, and execute a precise, minimal response that instantly resets the room back to your baseline. Ultimately, holding an unshakable inner peace in the presence of someone who actively seeks your emotional destruction is the highest manifestation of situational dominance. It communicates to everyone observing the dynamic and directly to the adversary's subconscious mind that their presence, opinions, and hostility carry zero weight within your reality. You demonstrate that your internal state is anchored so deeply in your own sovereign authority that no low-status operator possesses the power to alter your neurochemistry. Strategic calm shifts you from a passive victim defending an attack into an unshakable force that commands the room purely through the weight of your composure, leaving the manipulator trapped in an echo chamber of their own wasted energy. The asymmetry of emotional starvation operates on a fundamental principle of behavioral mechanics. High conflict personalities, manipulators, and toxic operators are entirely dependent on external emotional energy to sustain their internal framework. These individuals operate from an underlying baseline of severe internal insecurity, shallow self-worth, and constant psychological disorder. Because they lack an authentic, sovereign core, they rely on creating chaos, drama, and conflict in their surrounding environment to feel a false sense of control and personal significance. When they target you with a sudden accusation, a subtle insult, or an intentional breach of your boundaries, they are essentially launching an extraction mission. They are seeking to extract a specific neurochemical tax from your nervous system, namely your anger, your panicked confusion, your tearful distress, or your frantic attempts to defend your character. That emotional output serves as their primary currency, validating their power and convincing them that they possess the ultimate leverage over your reality. When you understand this structural dependency, you realize that your emotional reaction is the literal lifeblood of their toxic strategy. The moment you surrender to the impulse to fight back, argue, or explain yourself, you are actively supplying them with the exact fuel they require to perpetuate the dynamic. They do not care whether your reaction is positive or negative. They only care that your neurochemistry has been disrupted and that your focus has been completely redirected toward them. Your anger tells them they have successfully invaded your mind. Your long, defensive explanations tell them that you value their opinion and are begging for their approval. Even your visible frustration serves as concrete proof that they possess the remote control to your autonomic nervous system. By attempting to win a logical argument with someone whose primary goal is emotional extraction, you unwittingly become a full partner in your own psychological exploitation, keeping the toxic cycle running indefinitely. Withholding your emotional output creates a devastating, high-stakes asymmetry that completely implodes the aggressor's strategy from the inside out. When an individual launches a high-intensity emotional attack and receives absolute, unyielding emotional starvation in return, their internal system experiences an immediate crisis. They expect a defensive volley, a heated counterattack, or a visible collapse in your posture. Instead, they are met with a brick wall of absolute indifference, a relaxed posture, and cold, unbothered stillness. This total lack of emotional feedback creates an intense psychological void. Because there is zero external drama to absorb or exploit, the toxic energy they generated has nowhere to land, leaving it trapped entirely within their own perimeter. The conflict they tried to externalize onto you is forced straight back into their own nervous system, exposing their deep insecurity and driving them into a state of rapid disorientation. An unshakable nonverbal frame is the physical, neurological foundation upon which true tactical peace is constructed and enforced. Far too many people attempt to project calmness while their underlying physiology betrays them, mistaking quiet submission or a passive, weak posture for authentic composure. In high-stakes human dynamics and nonverbal profiling, peace is never a passive retreat. It is an aggressive, high-status stance of absolute physiological control. When a hostile operator, a manipulator, or an uncalibrated individual attempts to destabilize your focus, your verbal resistance matters far less than the subtle, non-verbal signals radiating from your nervous system. If your words declare that you are unbothered, but your blink rate spikes, your vocal pitch tightens, your breathing becomes shallow, or your hands perform nervous, pacifying micro-behaviors, your internal frame has already collapsed. Surrounding operators read these subtle leaks instantly, recognizing that your composure is merely a fragile, performative mask hiding acute internal distress. Establishing a truly unshakable nonverbal frame requires taking active, conscious command of your autonomic nervous system under intense social pressure. The exact instant an unexpected crisis strikes, or a calculated provocation is directed at your boundaries, your brain's limbic system attempts to trigger an automated stress response, preparing your body to fight, flee, or defensively appease the threat. To enforce a high-status frame, you must instantly execute a hard physical override of these primitive reflexes. You deliberately drop your shoulders away from your ears, relax the muscles across your face and jaw, and maintain an open, grounded physical stance that occupies space without aggression. You consciously slow your respiration down to a deep, diaphragmatic rhythm, sending an immediate signal down the vagus nerve to suppress your heart rate. By forcing your body into a state of deep physical relaxation in the precise moment a confrontation escalates, you seize absolute control over your physiology, refusing to permit an external event to dictate your baseline. This physical command manifests directly through your vocal delivery, eye contact, and temporal control of the interaction. When low-status operators feel threatened, they instinctively rush their speech, raise their vocal pitch, and offer rapid-fire justifications to eliminate social tension as quickly as possible. An operator holding an unshakable frame does the exact opposite. You slow your vocal cadence down, lower your pitch into a grounded, resonant register, and insert deliberate, unhurried pauses before responding to any question or accusation. You hold steady, unblinking eye contact without glaring, using your stillness to communicate that you are completely unthreatened by the surrounding noise. When you speak, you deliver concise, neutral statements, devoid of emotional fluff or defensive explanations, leaving wide gaps of silence that force the provoker to sit in the weight of their own uncalibrated behavior. You refuse to let anyone hurry your movement or force you into a frantic rhythm, demonstrating that you move exclusively at your own pace. Ultimately, holding this unshakable nonverbal stance communicates an unmistakable message of total psychological sovereignty to everyone in your environment. You demonstrate that your internal reality is so deeply anchored, stable, and self-contained that no external hostility possesses the weight required to disturb your composure. When an aggressor realizes that their most potent insults and calculated breaches produce zero physiological movement, zero vocal strain, and zero nonverbal distress from you, their attack completely loses its operational momentum. Your unyielding stillness transforms into a psychological mirror that exposes their emotional volatility, forcing them to realize that they are screaming against an immovable object. By mastering your nonverbal mechanics, you convert your peace into an impenetrable physical fortress, maintaining total situational authority regardless of the chaos happening around you. Denying narrative control is the ultimate tactical maneuver for dismantling an aggressor's strategy and forcing the provoke-and-punish cycle to collapse back onto them. In high-conflict social dynamics, an attacker rarely engages you on neutral ground. Instead, they construct a deliberate, manufactured narrative designed to put you on the defensive from the very first second. They throw out distorted accusations, weaponize half-truths, or project absurd character flaws onto you, specifically calculated to trigger your ego. The natural human inclination, when faced with an unfair narrative, is to immediately jump into the arena, clarify the facts, and passionately argue your innocence. In behavioral mechanics, this unthinking jump into the trap is precisely where you forfeit all situational power. The moment you begin defending yourself against a false premise, you implicitly validate that premise as something worthy of debate. You accept their rules, enter their constructed reality, and allow them to dictate the exact parameters of the interaction. To execute a complete denial of narrative control, you must recognize that your agreement to participate in an argument is entirely optional. High-authority operators do not negotiate their character, reality, or personal boundaries with low-status agitators. When a toxic individual presents an absurd accusation, your objective is not to correct their story, but to render their story completely irrelevant. You accomplish this by employing surgical, non-reactive communication patterns that refuse to supply the argument with any momentum. You respond with neutral, low-energy statements that offer zero emotional hooks, zero justifications, and zero defensive explanations. Statements like, "You are free to see it that way," "Noted," or simple cold silence completely destroy the narrative architecture they tried to build around you. By refusing to offer a counterargument, you leave their fabricated story hanging in empty air, unsupported by any conflict or resistance from your end. Ultimately, holding total authority over your narrative means accepting that you do not need an adversary's agreement, understanding, or validation to enforce your reality. You stop trying to convince toxic people that you are right, that you are fair, or that they have treated you unjustly. You allow them to hold whatever distorted, low-status opinions they choose, recognizing that their internal narrative about you has zero bearing on your actual trajectory, peace, or real-world execution. By withholding your explanations and maintaining a quiet, unbothered posture, you declare complete psychological independence from their opinion. You step completely outside of their game, proving that your reality is governed exclusively by your own standards, while they remain trapped in the exhausting, fruitless pursuit of trying to control a story that you have rendered completely meaningless.